Hello, and welcome to the Considerations for Progress Monitoring for English Language Learners with Equity in Mind webinar. This webinar was created by Audrey Cabell and Rebecca Zuck in collaboration with the New York State Education Department, the Office of Bilingual Education and World Languages, OBEWL, and the English Language Learner Leadership Council. The ELL Leadership Council is a group of approximately 50 English as a new language directors from around the state who meet regularly to discuss issues and best practices related to ELLs. This council has met regularly for the past 5 years to provide a direct line of communication between the OBEWL and ELL administrators from the districts with the highest enrollment of ELLs in New York State. Within the ELL Leadership Council, several work groups were created in response to COVID-19 school closures in the spring of 2020. This webinar is the result of the work of the Feedback and Engagement Work Group. The primary authors of this webinar are Audrey Cabell, who is the Director of ENL and Bilingual Education with Nyack Public Schools, and Rebecca Zuck, who is the Supervisor of Multilingual Education, ENL, with Buffalo Public Schools. We would like to thank our contributors, Chastity, Candace, Margarita, Kimberly, and Michelle, who are all members of the Feedback and Engagement Work Group.
The objective of this webinar is to provide teachers with the support on implementing effective feedback to ensure we are grading with equity, using proper data for grading, and have full knowledge of the English language learners we teach and grade. The objective will be met by answering 4 essential questions. Number 1, what are best practices for providing feedback to English language learners? Number 2, how do teachers grade for equity? Number 3, what additional data should be considered when grading? And number 4, how do you grade while keeping the whole child in mind? All of these questions will be touched upon in this webinar.
Let's begin with essential question 1. What are some best practices for providing feedback to ELLs? One best practice is quality feedback. In the April 2016 ASCD Educational Leadership publication, Dylan William brings to the forefront the importance of feedback in an article titled "The Secret of Effective Feedback." Within the article, he notes the following. Feedback should be specific and based on individual students' academic needs. Feedback also meets the individual students' academic and linguistic needs in a transparent fashion, which in turn allows students effective filters to be reduced, providing the opportunity for processing, learning, and understanding to occur. Feedback involves an exchange of information that supports ELLs becoming independent learners, develop critical thinking skills, and allows students to take ownership of their learning. This can occur in a variety of ways, such as teachers having conversations with students and students having conversations with each other, can increase understanding of a concept or skill. This, in turn, can provide a deeper understanding of information and misconceptions to be addressed. Another way this can occur is by teachers modeling a think aloud for students. This allows students to hear the thinking process out loud. Feedback can be clarifying questions that allows us to find out what the student is thinking. As the teacher, you want to dig deeper to find misconceptions or lack of understanding by asking probing questions. An example may sound like this. What do you mean when you say it ended badly? Please explain and let's discuss. Using clarifying questions is another tool to provide feedback for students. It allows both the teacher and the student to dig deeper into the misconceptions or lack of understanding. It also motivates students to engage in metacognition, thinking about their own thinking, and it encourages conversations and think alouds rather than rote learning. Now we will move on to essential question 2. How can teachers monitor student progress with equity in mind? Progress monitoring with equity in mind is achieved through a variety of formal assessments, activities, group discussions, projects, and other instructional activities. It is recommended that all activities be planned in advance, designed to gather information from all students, and aligned to the standards being taught, all of which provides teachers with an understanding of how a student arrived at an answer, allowing misconceptions and misunderstandings to be identified. Measuring student progress ensures that students are on track to reach their individualized academic goals, while progress monitoring provides data to determine if strategies that are being implemented are providing students with the academic supports they need in order to be successful. Progress monitoring with equity in mind is designed with students in mind through tiered questions, tiered supports and scaffolds, chunking of text, defined tier 2 and 3 vocabulary words, attention to linguistic needs for English proficiency, requires culturally relevant units of study created as project-based and performance-based assessments, and rubrics that allow all teachers to grade students with specific academic purposes in mind. Students know what is expected of them before completing the assignments. Let's dig a little deeper and provide examples.
There are different categories of information used when assessing students. The categories include homework, assessments, projects, classwork, participation, and behavior. These categories are given a value which total 100. Now I want you to reflect on an English language learner receiving the grading expectations on the first day of class and how each of these categories can impact them. Looking at the categories of information provided, we can see how each one can have a negative impact on our English language learners. As the blueprint for English language learners and multilingual learners state, we are all teachers of English language learners and must plan accordingly. A reflection question can be, did I provide my English language learner the equitable accommodations to allow them to succeed? The equitable accommodations include extra time and instructional scaffolds, and also resources such as bilingual glossary and translated materials. Realia is helpful as well. It provides the visuals that students need to help them make connections. Technology is also a great resource. Assessments should also provide the same equitable accommodations. Some of the possible impacts of traditional assessment practices include disengagement, demotivation, frustration, disempowerment, and bias. This webinet in the area of progress monitoring with equity in mind is informed in part by the Joe Feldman text titled Grading for Equity: What It Is, Why It Matters, and How It Can Transform Schools and Classrooms, which was published in 2019. The next few slides is research-based information from this text. To begin, Feldman argues some traditional grading practices disproportionately favor students of privilege and harm students of color. These students include students from low-income families, students who receive special education services, and English language learners. Let's reflect on how traditional grading practices started. Providing students with feedback has always been part of the teacher-student relationship. Grading, assessment, and progress monitoring as we know it today were born out of the changes occurring in the United States. Schools were expected to change with the social, economic, political, and scientific changes that were occurring in the early decades of the 20th century. 5 trends in particular impacted the grading system we use today. The first is the rise of manufacturing, and during this time, owners needed schools to create future workers. Because of this need, the owners put pressure on school boards to ensure that students were prepared to enter the workforce. Second, the progressive educators advocated for a more standardized school approach in which all students were instructed using the same curriculum. With the increase of jobs, there was an increase in migration and immigration. Fourth was the need for intelligence testing and categorization. This notion came with the idea that mental ability was innate, malleable, and could be quantified by various assessments. These assessments were used to assign roles of millions because the scores became viewed as a reliable description of one's intellectual capacity. And lastly, behaviorism, which argues that all human and animal behavior is the result of external stimuli, responses, learning histories, and reinforcements. This idea also drew on Pavlov's findings of the 1890s. None of the economic, social, political, and scientific changes had equity in mind. As teachers of English language learners, we can truly understand the significance of the teacher-student relationship. There are several studies that have found strong teacher-student relationships impact student learning. Extensive research has determined that positive teacher-student relationships had one of the most powerful influences on student achievement. Students are willing to do more for their teachers when their teacher believes in them. It's about building a trusting relationship. The relationships are culturally responsive and sensitive to the needs of our English language learners. According to Feldman, grading with equity has 3 pillars. They are accurate, bias resistant, and motivation. To be accurate is to ensure all calculations are mathematically correct, sound, and truly depict a student's ability. This also means that teachers should avoid giving zeros. Districts who have opted not to use numerical grading must also ensure accuracy by following the grading practices they have in place. Bias resistance establishes that progress monitoring practices give all students the opportunity to succeed regardless of privilege. Finally, grading must be motivational. Students should value learning instead of focusing on their grade. In the ASCD Summer 2020 issue, Feldman provided educators advice on how to grade during a virtual learning environment. The article titled "To Grade or Not to Grade" provides 4 key takeaways, which are the following. First, to use only a pass-incomplete grading system. Second, make sure grades are temporary because it provides students the opportunity to make up any work. Third, always provide feedback on performance. And lastly, remember to put students first.
Essential question 3. What data options might schools consider to assess student learning? When progress monitoring, additional data should be considered. This includes, but should not be limited to, formal and informal assessments, anecdotal notes of data collected from observations of student interactions within the four modalities of speaking, reading, listening, and writing, including academic conversations between students in the classroom. Participate in the Data-Driven Instructional Protocol, commonly known as DDI, which is a data-driven framework to ensure the success of all students. Using multiple data points will allow teachers to have a better understanding of the whole child. In addition, observing students in different aspects of learning will allow teachers the opportunity to build a comprehensive understanding of where the student's academic strengths and weaknesses are and what instructional strategies can be utilized to support each individual student. Essential question 4. How can teachers assess student learning while keeping the whole child in mind? Knowing your students is important in order to provide support for continued development of native or heritage language skills while supporting culturally and responsive teaching, in addition to building linguistic understanding. Develop lessons to target a specific skill or concept. Provide targeted academic supports. Differentiate to support student learning and academic growth. Differentiation in all areas, including assessments to accommodate and adjust to the various needs of the students. Engage in conversations with students, which is important to build a trusting relationship. Get to know the whole child. New York State Department of Education and the Office of Bilingual Education and World Languages has developed documents that provide a deeper understanding of English language learners. The information provided in these documents defines our responsibilities as administrators and teachers of ELLs. These documents include Blueprint for English Language Learner and Multilingual Learner Success, developed in 2015 with the purpose of ensuring that all English language learners attain the highest level of academic success and language proficiency while ensuring that individual educational paths and social emotional needs are met, leading students to college and career readiness. Done with intention in response to the ever-changing global economy, in order to develop a foundation of understanding that all teachers must be skilled in how to support ELLs as they acquire content knowledge while also progressing towards English language proficiency, as all teachers are teachers of ELLs. NYSET slot targets of measurement. Developed in 2015, NYSETSLAT targets of measurement describe what students should be able to produce academically at each grade band level, linked to specific targets of measurement and their linguistic purposes. Educators can utilize this resource to ensure their instruction and formative assessments are aligned with these targets and meet the students' academic and linguistic needs. Performance level descriptions. Developed in 2015, this resource can be used to support all ELLs in the designing of scaffolded instruction and differentiated assessment to target students at various performance levels, as well as design a scope and sequence to move students along the continuum of language acquisition, allowing students' individual academic needs to be met while maintaining a low affective filter in order to support social emotional health and academic success. Bilingual Common Core Progressions. Developed in 2014, the Bilingual Common Core Progressions explains the new language and home language arts progressions, breaking down each component and explaining how teachers can apply the resources in their classrooms to support student learning, all while supporting the home language needs of the students based on where the student currently is in literacy development. Finally, culturally responsive sustaining framework. Developed in 2019, this framework will guide the work of educators in order to create student-centered learning environments that affirm racial, linguistic, and cultural identities, prepare students for rigor and independent learning, develop students' abilities to connect across lines of differences, elevating historically marginalized voices, and empower students as agents of social change. The framework is grounded in four principles, which include welcoming and affirming environment, high expectations and rigorous instruction, inclusive curriculum and assessment, and ongoing professional learning. All of the links have been provided for you so you can further explore these New York State resources.
We have provided the links for additional resources to support your efforts of ensuring that students are graded with equity in mind. We would like to leave you with this quote. We believe that it's critical for all teachers to at least recognize that English language learners are faced with the sometimes overwhelming task of learning academic content and the English language simultaneously, and show compassion and support when it comes to giving them a letter grade. This concludes our presentation on considerations for progress monitoring for English language learners with equity in mind. If you have any additional questions and/or comments, please feel free to contact us. We thank you for your time.